The laughter didn't die right away. It lingered, bouncing off the walls of the living room where we all sat crammed together after dinner. The smell of turkey and cinnamon pie still clung to the air, but now it was mixed with the sharp tang of red wine. Plates had been cleared, and people were lounging on the couches and armchairs, full and a little tipsy. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my knees pressed together, holding a glass of water like it was an anchor. My husband sat beside me, his arm resting on the back of the couch, his body angled toward mine. He was quiet, his jaw tight, but his hand brushed against my shoulder as if to say he was there. Across from us, Aunt Carol was the star of her own show. She sprawled in the biggest armchair, scarf still knotted neatly, pearls glinting against her sweater. Her wineglass never seemed to empty, though she sipped often, letting the stem twirl between her fingers like she owned the whole room. People leaned toward her when she spoke, waiting for her next sharp remark. "So tell us again," she said, her smile widening. "You majored in art history, correct?" My stomach clenched. She wasn't done. Not even close. "Yes," I said quietly, forcing the word out like it didn't sting. Her laugh came again, a high, sharp crack that made my husband's hand tense on my shoulder. "Art history," she repeated, louder this time, turning to the others. "A degree for people who like staring at pretty pictures. What a career path." A cousin snorted. Someone else shook their head, smirking into their glass. The fire in the fireplace crackled, filling the small silence before Carol leaned forward, eyes glinting. "You know," she said, lowering her voice like she was about to share a secret. "I've always said if you're going to waste 4 years, at least do it with something useful. Business, finance, even nursing. Something that puts food on the table. But art history," she gave a dramatic shrug. "That's nothing but trivia at cocktail parties." The words landed heavier than she knew. Or maybe she did know. Maybe she wanted them to cut. My face felt hot, but I didn't move. I pressed the rim of my glass to my lips, hiding the small smile I forced. Because what she couldn't see, what no one in that cozy living room knew, was the truth. She thought she was talking to someone beneath her, a woman who married into the family with nothing to offer, a wife who had no ambition, no money, no power. That was the picture she'd painted of me for years, and everyone here seemed to buy it. But if I wanted, I could have bought the very chair she sat in. The whole house, even. More than once. I shifted slightly, crossing my legs, careful not to meet her eyes. Let her laugh. Let her sip her wine and tear me down for sport. Every word she spoke, every chuckle she got from the cousins sitting on the rug, only made the moment I was holding on to sweeter. My husband gave a small sigh, breaking the silence. "Carol, maybe that's enough." "Oh, don't be so sensitive," she said, brushing him off with a flick of her hand. "I'm only telling the truth. She should hear it from family instead of strangers." The cousins chuckled again. My stomach turned, but I stayed still, breathing slow. The living room buzzed with chatter, but under it all, I could feel the weight of my secret pressing at the back of my throat. I looked around. The flicker of the fireplace lit up the smug tilt of Carol's smile. The others' faces glowed with amusement. My husband's eyes flicked toward mine, dark with quiet frustration. And me, I simply sipped my water and smiled faintly. They could laugh tonight. I wasn't in a hurry. The time would come when the laughing would stop. When I first met my husband, I never thought his family would become such a heavy shadow over our lives. We met in college, back when my hair was shorter and my future was still a blank page. He was studying mechanical engineering, always carrying around notebooks filled with numbers and sketches. I was the one walking around with paint under my nails and stacks of books on art and history. People teased me for picking a degree that sounded impractical, but he never did. He'd sit with me for hours in the library, helping me quiz dates of Renaissance painters while I listened to him explain formulas I didn't understand. He told me once, when we were still only friends, that the world cared too much about titles and not enough about happiness. That's what drew me to him. He didn't care that my dreams looked different from me. He believed in them. By the time we got married, I was already quietly secure. I had inherited shares from my late father's company, and years before graduation, one of my projects had turned into a small business that grew faster than I ever expected. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't see the point in telling people numbers or parading my success. Money was there, silent and steady, and I kept it close. But his aunt never saw me as anything more than wasted potential. From the first time we met, she curled her lip at my degree. "Art history?" she said then, like it was something sticky she'd stepped on. Over the years, her comments only sharpened. She'd call me lazy when I spent time painting. She'd call me spoiled when I bought nice things, though I paid for them myself. She'd tell the cousins I was unambitious, that I dragged my husband down with. It wasn't just words. At a birthday dinner, she leaned across the table with her martini glass in hand and said to my husband, right in front of me, "You're still young. You could have chosen someone smarter, someone who'd match your drive." Her voice was soft, like it was advice, but her eyes flicked at me, cutting deep. He squeezed my hand under the table, but he didn't argue back. He never really did with her. That was the first time I realized how they all saw me. Not as part of them, not as equal, but as a weak link attached to my husband. The one who didn't bring anything to the table. The betrayal deepened weeks later, at another gathering in their backyard. The night was warm, the air filled with the smell of grilled food. I'd stepped inside to grab something from the kitchen, and that's when I heard voices drifting from the side porch. I froze when I realized it was Carol and two of the cousins. "She doesn't need to be part of this," Carol said, her tone sharp. "When your uncle divides the properties, we'll make sure it's only between the bloodline. She hasn't earned anything. She doesn't deserve it." One cousin muttered in agreement, the other laughed nervously. "She's just here because of him," Carol went on. "If he were smart, he'd still have time to find a woman who actually contributes. Not one who studies paintings and sits around with her hands folded." I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding so loudly I thought they might hear it. For a moment, I wanted to storm out and confront them, but I didn't. I turned away quietly, my nails digging into my palms. That was the night I understood something with certainty. They didn't just dislike me. They wanted me gone, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. The birthday party was loud, the kind where music and chatter mixed into one steady buzz. People held plates piled with food, glasses of wine in their hands, laughter rising from every corner of the living room. I stayed close to my husband, trying not to draw attention, but Carol noticed me anyway. She always did. She started by praising others. One cousin's wife had just been promoted at her law firm. Carol clapped the loudest, smiling with pride. Then she turned to another cousin finishing his medical residency and told him he was the kind of man who makes the family proud. People nodded, clapping again. Her eyes found me next. "And then we have our art historian," she said brightly, like she was including me. Her voice was sharp beneath the smile. "How's that career going? Solved the mystery of a few old paintings lately?" The room chuckled. It wasn't roaring laughter, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that most of them thought it was funny. I pressed my lips together, forcing myself to stay calm. Carol didn't stop. "It must be nice," she continued, "having free time while the rest of us are buried in real work. Some of us are saving lives, some are building businesses. And then, of course, we have you." She gestured at me with her glass, like I was part of a punchline. I felt my patience slipping, but I stayed still. My husband stepped forward before I could speak. "Aunt Carol, that's unnecessary," he said firmly. "She works hard in her own way. You don't need to put her down every time we're together." The chatter in the room quieted. Heads turned. Carol leaned back, sipping her drink, her smile never faltering. "Oh, come now," she said. "I'm only telling the truth. You're too protective, always jumping in to rescue her." He frowned. "That's not what I'm doing. I'm asking you to show some respect." Carol tilted her head, the smile turning into something cruel. "Respect? Darling, I respect people who earn it. And you," she pointed her glass at him now, "you've let yourself become her shield. Don't you see how it looks? A strong man like you, tiptoeing around to defend his wife's feelings? You look whipped." The word landed hard. A few people gasped softly, others laughed under their breath. My husband's face flushed red. His mouth opened like he wanted to fight back, but Carol raised her eyebrows, daring him to continue. He went quiet. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, before the music in the background filled it again. Carol turned her attention back to the group, pleased with herself, while I stood there gripping my glass tightly enough to hurt. I didn't show it, not outward. I smiled faintly, my expression steady, but inside something shifted. I'd been holding back for so long, letting her words bounce off me like stones against a wall. But each one left a mark, and now the cracks were showing. As the party carried on, people drifted away into smaller conversations, but I stayed rooted in place, watching Carol laugh with another cousin as though nothing had happened. She had embarrassed me, twisted my husband's defense into a weakness, and made me feel small in front of everyone. For the first time, I wasn't just hurt. I was done. I didn't speak up then. I didn't argue. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty as I stood there with the noise of the party around me. I would not let this go on forever. After that party, I stopped waiting for things to change on their own. Carol wasn't going to wake up one day and suddenly treat me with respect. If anything, her jabs were getting bolder. So I decided to change my own approach. I didn't strike back openly. Not yet. Instead, I began planting small seeds. At family gatherings, when someone asked what I'd been doing lately, I didn't give the short, dismissive answers I used to. I would smile and say, "Oh, I've had a few meetings," or "I've been working on some projects." I left it vague on purpose. If they wanted to believe it was nothing, that was their choice. Sometimes, while they bragged about promotions or salaries, I'd casually mention investments I was checking on. I never gave details, but the word alone was enough to make Carol's eyebrows shoot up. I could see the curiosity spark for a second before she covered it with mockery. At one dinner, she leaned back in her chair and laughed, the same sharp laugh I'd come to know too well. Investments, she said. Darling, please. What are you really doing? Stocking shelves somewhere in secret? Or maybe you're a cashier and too embarrassed to tell us. The cousins laughed with her, shaking their heads. My husband shifted uncomfortably, but I only smiled, swirling the water in my glass. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Her taunts grew sharper after that. When I excused myself early from a gathering, saying I had a meeting the next morning, she smirked and asked if Starbucks was holding interviews. If I said I was busy with projects, she told everyone I must be knitting scarves in the basement. She turned me into the family joke, her voice always loud enough to make sure I heard every word. But I didn't flinch anymore. Each cruel comment was fuel. Each laugh around the room only added to my patience. I wanted her to keep going, to make herself look as arrogant as possible. The more she mocked me, the sweeter it would be when the truth came out. One evening, I stayed quiet in the corner of the living room as she performed for her audience. She was telling a story about a colleague's daughter who had just gotten into medical school. Now that's ambition, she said proudly, before turning her eyes toward me. Not everyone can manage that. Some of us are dreamers, but dreaming doesn't pay bills. I simply nodded, as if agreeing with her. My calm seemed to irritate her even more. I could see it in the tightness of her smile, the way she leaned forward to make her next jab sting harder. But I kept my voice light, my words simple. I'll be fine, I said. I've been working on things you'll hear about soon. That line made her laugh until she wiped her eyes. Hear about soon, she repeated. The only thing we'll hear is that you've run out of money and need someone to hire you at minimum wage. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I only sat there, steady and patient, while the fire grew inside me. The truth was, she wasn't pushing me down anymore. She was handing me the perfect rope to pull myself up and leave her hanging. She thought she was clever, thought she had everyone convinced of her version of it. But all she was doing was digging her own grave, one careless insult at a time. The news came a month later. Carol was hosting the annual family reunion at her house. It wasn't just the usual circle this time. She had invited distant relatives, business contacts, and a few friends she liked to show off to. People who mattered to her, people she wanted to impress. When I heard, I knew it was the moment I had been waiting for. She wouldn't be able to resist making me the center of her jokes with such a large audience. She would go too far, and everyone would see her for what she really was. The planning started weeks in advance. My husband mentioned it over breakfast, his voice heavy. She's already talking about how fancy it's going to be, he said, flipping through his phone. She wants this to be the event of the year. I stirred my coffee slowly. Perfect, I said softly, almost to myself. He looked up at me, frowning. You don't have to go, you know. I don't want you to sit through her comments again. It's always the same. She singles you out, and nobody says a word. I reached across the table, brushing my hand over his. I want to go. He shook his head. I'd rather protect you from it. I know what she's like. You don't deserve to be dragged through another one of her performances. That made me smile just a little. Oh, I wouldn't miss this for the world. He gave me a long look, as if trying to read something in my expression. Maybe he sensed I had something planned, but I didn't say more. I only sipped my coffee and let the moment pass. As the date drew closer, I could feel the tension building. Every time Carol called him, she dropped hints about how excited she was to see everyone. Her voice on speakerphone carried a smug tone, one that made my skin crawl. She was preparing her stage, and she couldn't wait for me to step into it. On the morning of the reunion, the house buzzed with movement. I dressed carefully, not flashy, but polished enough to draw the right kind of attention. My husband watched me from the doorway, still uneasy. Are you sure about this? He asked. Yes, I said calmly. Absolutely sure. When we pulled up to Carol's grand house, cars already lined the street. People were spilling onto the front lawn, greeting each other with hugs and laughter. Inside, the living room had been transformed. Caterers moved around with trays of food, soft music played from hidden speakers, and the smell of expensive candles drifted through the air. Carol was in the center of it all, wearing pearls and a wide smile, greeting every guest as though she were hosting a gala. When she saw us walk in, her eyes narrowed just slightly before her smile returned. She kissed my husband on the cheek, then looked at me with that familiar glint in her eyes. I'm so glad you could make it, she said sweetly, her hand tightening on my arm. Everyone will be thrilled to see you. I smiled back, meeting her gaze steadily. I'm sure they will. The house filled quickly, voices rising in cheerful waves. Relatives I hadn't seen in years arrived, along with a few men in tailored suits and women in sparkling dresses. Carol's important friends, the ones she bragged about. She moved among them like a queen, but every so often, her eyes darted toward me, as if making sure I was still where she wanted me, in her sight, ready to be the evening's entertainment. I let her think that. I let her believe she had the upper hand, because tonight, in front of all these people she wanted to impress, she was going to give me exactly the opening I needed. The stage was set. The reunion started off politely enough. People gathered in little groups, balancing plates of food and glasses of wine, while soft music played in the background. Conversations filled the living room, and the smell of roasted meat and garlic drifted from the kitchen. I moved quietly through the crowd, greeting relatives, smiling when needed, never giving anyone a reason to look too closely. Carol floated around like she owned the place. Her pearls caught the light every time she tilted her head, her laughter carrying across the room. She made sure to stop at every group, complimenting one person, bragging about another, keeping all eyes on her. Eventually, she called for attention. She tapped her glass with a fork, the sharp sound cutting through the chatter until the room fell quiet. "I just want to say how proud I am of this family," she began, her voice warm and grand. "We've raised doctors, lawyers, engineers, people who make a difference in the world." There were nods and small claps, people smiling at each other. Carol pointed to one cousin in a suit. "Here we have Mark, already running his own law practice. Such an accomplishment." She turned to another, a tall man near the fireplace. "And Daniel, finishing his residency. Soon he'll be saving lives every day." The room clapped again, the energy light and pleasant. But then she turned her eyes on me. Her smile stretched wider, though her gaze was sharp. "And then we have," she paused, letting the silence stretch, "our dear art historian." She tilted her head. "Tell us, what is it you're doing with that degree these days? Organizing crayons? Counting statues?" The room went quiet for a moment before nervous laughter broke out. A few people chuckled, others looked at each other uncertainly, unsure if they should laugh or stay silent. I didn't move. I held my glass steady, my face calm. Carol wasn't finished. "It's so charming, really," she went on, "having someone in the family who values pretty pictures. Of course, it's not quite the same as saving lives or running businesses, but we all contribute in our own little ways, don't we?" This time, the laughter was louder. Some guests shook their heads in amusement. Others clapped their hands together like she'd told the best joke of the night. My husband stiffened beside me, but I rested my hand lightly on his arm, stopping him from saying anything. Carol looked pleased with herself, sipping from her wine as if the matter were settled. "You know," she added, voice loud enough for the whole room, "sometimes I wonder what it must feel like to sit in a room full of people with real careers and still keep smiling. But maybe ignorance really is bliss." A ripple of laughter spread again, though a few guests avoided my eyes, embarrassed for me. The ones who laughed the hardest were the ones who always followed Carol's lead. Through it all, I stayed still. I didn't argue, didn't explain myself. My face stayed relaxed, almost amused. Inside, my heart was steady. This was exactly the moment I had expected. She was giving me everything I needed without even realizing. I let the laughter die down on its own. The music filled the pause again, people turning back to their conversations, but I didn't move my gaze from Carol. She thought she had won, thought she had cut me down in front of everyone important to her. What she didn't know was that I had been waiting for this exact stage, this exact audience, and I wasn't going to waste it. The laughter around the room faded, but the sting of Carol's words hung in the air. I set my glass down on the table beside me and finally spoke. My voice was calm, steady, not raised at all. "You know," I said, looking straight at her, "degrees don't always decide where someone ends up. Success doesn't follow just one path." The room went quiet again. A few people shifted, clearly surprised I had answered back. Carol raised her eyebrows, smiling like she was amused. I continued, keeping my tone light. "Some people build companies. Some grow their money through investment. Others find value in collecting things that increase over time, like art. There's more than one way to build a future." A murmur moved through the guests. Some leaned in, curious, while others looked confused. Carol laughed softly, shaking her head. "Oh, please," she said. "Listen to her. Companies, investments, art collections? Do you hear yourself? You make it sound like you're some kind of tycoon. What are you really doing, dear? Reading magazines and pretending it's work." A few people chuckled, but not as strongly this time. I noticed the shift. They weren't laughing as freely. They were listening. I smiled. "I don't have to pretend. I've worked on more than one project that turned into something valuable. I've put money into businesses that paid off. And yes, I've collected art pieces, some of them worth more now than when I bought them." The air tightened. Guests looked at one another, their faces serious now, waiting to see what came next. My husband stayed quiet, his eyes fixed on me, but I felt his hand press lightly against mine, as if telling me to go on. Carol leaned back in her chair, letting out a loud scoff. "You expect us to believe that? Investments, companies, valuable art? Darling, don't embarrass yourself. You're just trying to sound important because we're all here tonight. It's cute really, but no one's buying it." Her words echoed, but they didn't land the way she wanted. The guests weren't laughing anymore. Some stared at me with wide eyes, some with doubt, some with a flicker of curiosity. The room had shifted from amusement to tension, every gaze moving between her and me. I didn't rush. I let the silence stretch, sipping from my glass before answering. "I don't need you to believe me," I said softly. "The facts speak for themselves." And with that, the room stilled completely. All eyes were on me now, waiting. I reached into my bag and took out a slim folder I had brought with me. The room stayed quiet, every head turning as I placed it on the table. I opened it slowly, sliding a few papers out. "These," I said clearly, "are statements from my accounts. You'll see numbers that don't really match the story you've been telling about me." I handed the first page to the cousin standing closest. He glanced down, blinked hard, then passed it to the person beside him. The page moved around the circle of guests, and with each new pair of eyes, the room grew heavier. I pulled out another sheet. "Here's an article," I added, holding it up. "It's from when I sold one of my companies 3 years ago. The acquisition made the business pages. Some of you might have missed it, but it happened." I placed the article down on the table. The bold headline with my name in it glared up under the lights. A murmur ran through the room, low and sharp. Finally, I lifted my phone. "If that's still not enough, we can make a call right now." I dialed quickly, pressing speaker before anyone could speak. A man's voice came through clearly. "Good evening, this is Michael Carter." "Hello, Michael," I said calmly. "Would you mind confirming something for me?" "Just the basics." "Of course," he replied. "Your portfolio currently stands at about $260 million in assets under management." The room froze. Not a breath, not a cough, not a single sound. "Thank you," I said, ending the call. I placed the phone down beside the papers. That should clear up any confusion. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I only looked at Carol. Her face was drained of color, her lips parted but no words came out. The laugh she had carried so easily all evening was gone, choked off before it could escape. She sat back in her chair, stiff, her hand tightening around her glass as if it might steady her. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Guests stared at me, then at her, then back at me again. No one knew where to look. Some shifted awkwardly, some lowered their eyes. I simply folded the papers back into the folder and closed it with care. My voice was quiet when I spoke again. "I don't usually talk about money, but tonight, I thought it was time to stop letting false stories go unchecked." Carol's glass clinked softly against the table as she set it down. Her lips trembled, and for once she had nothing to say. The woman who had laughed the loudest was finally silent. The silence in the room broke suddenly. Cousin Mark, the lawyer, stepped forward with a wide grin. "Well, I always knew you had something big going on," he said quickly. "You've just got that presence, you know?" Others joined in, voices overlapping. "Incredible work. So impressive. You should have told us sooner." The same people who had laughed at Carol's jokes minutes before were now reaching for my hand, praising me like I was the star of the evening. I smiled politely but didn't thank them. Their sudden change was too obvious, too desperate. They weren't proud of me. They were afraid of being on the wrong side of the room now. Carol finally forced a laugh. It sounded strained, brittle. "Well," she said, waving her hand as though brushing dust from the air, "you all know me. I joke too much." Of course I believed in her. I've always said she had potential, haven't I? Her eyes darted nervously around the guests, searching for agreement. No one answered. I turned to her, my voice sharp but calm. "No, that's not true. You've called me lazy. You've told my husband he should have married someone better. You've mocked me at every chance you got. And tonight, in front of everyone you wanted to impress, you tried to humiliate me again. That's not support. That's cruelty." The room was dead quiet. Every face was on us. Carol's mouth opened, then closed. She tried to laugh again, but it died in her throat. "You thought I would stay silent forever," I continued. "You wanted me small so you could feel bigger. But the truth is, your jokes say more about you than they ever did about me." Carol's face turned red, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. I didn't mean." My husband stepped forward then, his voice firm. "Yes, you did. And I'm done watching you tear her down. She's stronger than you'll ever give her credit for, and I'm proud of her. Proud of everything she's done." That was the final blow. The guests shifted, some nodding, some whispering. A few looked at Carol with open disgust. The power she had over the room only minutes earlier was gone, drained away completely. I picked up my bag and slipped the folder back inside. Standing tall, I looked around the room one last time. "I think that's enough for tonight." Then I turned and walked out, my husband at my side. No one stopped me. No one dared. Behind me, Carol sat frozen in her chair, stripped of her smile, her authority, and her audience. For once, she had nothing left to hide behind. In the days after the reunion, the shift was obvious. The same family members who once followed Carol's lead now avoided her. At dinners and calls, her voice no longer carried weight. When she tried to joke, no one laughed. When she gave opinions, people moved the conversation elsewhere. The influence she had guarded for years slipped away like sand through her fingers. A few relatives reached out to me privately. Some sent messages, others called. They apologized for joining in the laughter, for staying quiet when they should have spoken up. Their words were clumsy, filled with excuses, but I listened without offering much back. Others, though, were different. They suddenly wanted to know me better. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years sent invitations to lunch. Distant relatives asked for advice about investments or hinted at partnerships. I saw their smiles for what they were, opportunistic, not genuine. I stayed polite but distant. I didn't need their approval, and I didn't crave their company. Carol, meanwhile, carried her humiliation like a shadow. Every time I saw her after that night, her confidence was thinner. She tried to act as if nothing had changed, but the family's silence toward her was louder than any insult I could have given. She had mocked me to elevate herself, but now she was the one on the outside, stripped of the respect she loved so much. At one small gathering weeks later, she tried to sit beside me, her voice soft. You know, I never meant to hurt you. It was just family teasing. You understand that, don't you? I met her eyes, steady and cool. I understand exactly what it was, I said. Nothing more. I left her sitting there with her words hanging in the air. I never forgot who had laughed the hardest when I stayed quiet. I never forgot the looks on their faces when the truth came out. And I never forgot the silence that followed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't play her game. I simply let the truth do the work. So tell me, do you think Aunt Carol's laugh finally caught up with her, or should I have just ignored her and kept the peace? I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. And if you like stories where the one doing the mocking ends up getting humbled, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.